Hi, my name's Amanda and I'm a pharmacist. Today I'll be talking about basic math skills for pharmacy technicians. We'll be covering fractions, decimals, and percentages. And if you find this video useful, please press the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share it with others who may find it helpful too. Thanks, I really appreciate it. So basic math skills are the building blocks for solving a variety of pharmacy calculations. This includes fractions, decimals, and percentages. So we'll begin with fractions. So what is a fraction? A fraction is a portion of a whole indicated by division of the whole into equal parts. So for example, 1/4, it can be written as 1/4 or 1/4, and sometimes that will be said 1/4, or as I said, 1/4. So 1/4 means one of 4 equal parts. So you can see I have a pie shape here, and we have one of the parts shaded. It's divided into 4 equal parts and we have one part shaded. So one of the 4 equal parts, that would be 1/4. So the top number of a fraction, that is the portion of the whole, and it's called the numerator. The bottom number of a fraction, that is the whole, and it is called the denominator. So for our example of 1/4, 1 on the top is the numerator, and that is the portion. And 4 on the bottom, that's the denominator, and that's the whole. So here's another pie to look at. So what fraction of this pie is shaded? And the answer is 2/4. So 2 of the 4 equal parts is what's shaded. So 2/4 means that there are 2 equal parts which are worth 1/4 each. So now we'll talk about equivalent fractions. A fraction can be changed to an equivalent fraction by multiplying or dividing the numerator and denominator by the same number. So for our pie that we just had, the example of 2/4, if we divide the numerator and the denominator each by 2, 2 divided by 2 equals 1, 4 divided by 2 equals 2. So that equals 1/2. So 2/4 is equal to 1/2, and you can see that with our pie. It's 2/4, but also if you're looking at it as halves, there is 1/2 of it shaded. So now we'll talk about when a fraction has an equal numerator and denominator. So we have our pie again in the 4 pieces. Each piece is worth 1/4. So if we add our fourths, we have 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4. That equals 4/4. So we have an equal numerator and denominator. And when we have that, that is always going to equal 1. So 4/4 equals 1. So we have 4 out of the 4 pieces. That's going to be one whole pie. And you can see the numerator and denominator are equal. Now we'll talk about improper fractions. So when the numerator and denominator are equal, the fraction equals 1, which we just saw in our last slide, for like 4/4 equals 1. Now when the numerator is greater than the denominator, the fraction is going to be greater than 1, and this is known as an improper fraction. For example, 5/4, 5/4, it is equal to 1 1/4. And you can see if we have 5/4 here, we're going to have one whole pie, which is 4/4, plus 1/4 of another pie. So that's 5/4. It's an improper fraction. We can convert it to its whole number and the fraction that's remaining, which will be 1 1/4. So now we're going to talk more about the definition of a fraction, look a little closer at that. So a fraction is a portion of a whole indicated by division of the whole into equal parts. So the line separating the portion and the whole of a fraction, it means to divide. So per means to divide. Remember I said one of the ways to say like a fraction like 1/4 is 1/4 or 1/4, but per means to divide. So for example of 1/4, 1/4, 1/4 equals 1 divided by 4. And if we solve that with a calculator or working out the division problem, that equals 0.25. So 0.25 is what 1/4 is in decimal form. And we'll talk a little more about that when we get to our decimal section. So we'll look now at some fraction and decimal equivalents. These are common ones that you may see. 3/4 equals 0.75. 1/2 is 0.5. 1/3 is 0.33. 1/4 is 0.25. 1/8 is 0.125. Now, it's not necessary to memorize this because they can easily be calculated by dividing, but these are helpful to know, especially if you aren't familiar with fraction and decimal equivalents. Now we'll look at a whole number when it's written as a fraction. So since a fraction means to divide, to write a whole number as a fraction, we just simply put it over 1. So for example, the number 4 written as a fraction would be 4 over 1. And you can see that that makes sense because 4 divided by 1 is 4. And we know that the fraction line means to divide. So 4 equals 4 over 1. And this is a very important concept to know for pharmacy conversion calculations. And you'll see that in some of the other math videos I've done about how we put a number over 1 to set up a conversion. Now we'll look at multiplying fractions. So fractions are often multiplied in pharmacy conversion calculations. So to multiply fractions, first we're going to multiply the numerators across. Remember, that's the top number. And then we're going to multiply the denominators across. That's on the bottom. And then we're going to reduce the new fraction to its simplest form. So for example, if we have 3/4 times 2/3, we're going to multiply the top across, the numerators. 3 times 2 is 6. And then we'll multiply the denominators across. 4 times 3 is 12. And so we get 6/12. Well, that's not in its simplest form because we know that both of those numbers can be divided by the same number. And the highest number that they can be divided by is 6. So 6 divided by 6 is 1. And 12 divided by 6 is 2. So that equals 1/2 in its simplest form. Okay, so that's finishes fractions. Now we're going to look at decimals. So a decimal is a way of writing a fraction expressed as a base of 10. And the word decimal actually means based on 10. So decimals, they contain a decimal point. On the left side of the decimal point is a whole number, and on the right side is the fraction part. So I have a little chart here. You can see the decimal there. On the left, you have the whole number. This will be the hundredths, tens, and ones places. And then on the right of the decimal, that's the fraction portion. So that would be tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, and it keeps going. So for example, 0.1, that would be 1/10. 2.25, that is 2 25/100ths. Okay, so now we'll just look a little more at the number place values with decimals. So you have the decimal point. Think of that being in the middle. And then on the left side, we have the whole numbers, which are going to be numbers greater than 1. And then on the right side, we have the numbers that would be less than 1. These would be the fractions. So on the right side, we have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, 100,000ths, then millionths. And it just keeps going on that way. So as it goes to the right, it gets smaller. And then for their whole numbers, as it goes to the left, it's going to get larger. So from the decimal point to the left, we have the ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, and millions places. So that just hopefully explains that a little better. So now we'll talk about naming decimals. So decimals are named by their lowest place value. And it's important to know how to name decimals when we get to some of our calculations. So 0.2, we can say 0.2, but that would be 2/10ths is the way that that is said by its official name. 0.02 is 200ths, and 0.002 would be 2,000ths. So when a decimal also contains a whole number, the way that you say that, you're going to read the whole number first, followed by point or and. So a common way to say it would be 3.125, but that is actually 3 125,000ths. Okay, now we'll look at adding and subtracting decimals. So when adding and subtracting decimals, be sure that the decimal point is lined up. So for example, 0.25 plus 0.55, our decimal points are already lined up, so there's nothing we need to do but just make sure they're in a line when we add. So 5 plus 5 is 0, carry your 1. 5 plus 2 plus 1 would be 8. And then our 0 plus 0 is 0. And our decimal point just stays lined up. So the answer is 0.80. But since the 0 is the last number of the decimal, that can be removed and the value remains the same. So 0.80 is 0.8. Okay, now here's another example with subtracting a decimal. So 3.25 minus 1.2. In this case, we need to add a 0 onto the end of the decimal so that our decimal points line up. Remember, a 0 is the last number of a decimal. It can be added or removed and the value will remain the same. So we would do 3.25 minus 1.20 and then do the math. So 5 minus 0 is 5, 2 minus 2 is 0, and then 3 minus 1 is 2. So we get 2.05. So now we'll talk about how to convert a decimal to a fraction. So this is why knowing how to read decimals is important. So for example, what is 0.1 as a fraction? So 0.1 is read as 1/10. Well, 1/10 as a fraction is 1 over 10. So 0.1 equals 1 over 10, or 1/10. And now another example. What is 0.35 as a fraction? 0.35 is read as 35 hundredths. So 35 hundredths as a fraction would be 35 over 100. So that would be in its fraction form, but now we need to reduce it to the simplest form. So both of these numbers are divisible by 5, so we'll do that to reduce it to the simplest form. So we'll divide our numerator and our denominator both by 5. So 35 divided by 5 is 7. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So 0.35 equals 7/20. Okay, so here's our chart again of our common fraction decimal equivalents. And as I said, it's not necessary to memorize this because they can be easily converted to one another, but it is helpful to know, especially if you aren't familiar with fraction and decimal equivalents. So 3/4 is 0.75, 1/2 is 0.5, 1/3 is 0.33, 1/4 is 0.25, and 1/8 is 0.125. Okay, now we're going to look at percentages. So a percentage is a number expressed as a fraction of 100, and percent actually means per 100. So percentages contain a percent sign. And just to give you an idea about what percentages mean, 100% would equal the full amount. So you could think of this as the whole pie when we were looking at fractions. 1% would be 1 part out of 100. So drug strengths are sometimes expressed as percentages and may need to be converted to fractions or decimal amounts. So that's what we're going to be focusing on with percentages. So I have our chart once again with the common fraction and decimals, and I've added the percentage equivalents on here as well. So we'll just go over those quickly again. 3/4 equals 0.75, which is 75%. 1/2 equals 0.5, which is 50%. 1/3 is 0.33, which is 33%. 1/4 is 0.25, which is 25%. And 1/8 is 0.125, which is 12.5%. So you can see the similarity between the decimal and percentage equivalents. So you can see that's easily converted. So to determine a percentage equivalent of a decimal, all you have to do is move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So for example, just 0.05, that is 5%. 0.44, we just move the decimal 2 places to the right, and that's 44%. So now we'll look at converting percentages to fractions. So first, you're going to write the percentage as a fraction by putting the number over 100. Remember, percent means per 100. and then we'll reduce the fraction to its simplest form. So for example, 5%, to write that as a fraction, would be 5 over 100. Okay, that's not in its simplest form because both numbers are divisible by 5. So we'll divide 5 by 5, and that equals 1, and then 100 divided by 5 equals 20. So 5% as a fraction would be 1/20th. Now if we go the other way and convert a fraction to a percentage, what we do is multiply the fraction by 100 over 1, and then reduce the fraction to its simplest form. In this case, it's usually going to be dividing. So our example was 5/8 times 100 over 1. So 5 times 100 is 500. 8 times 1 is 8. And then if we do the math and divide 500 by 8 to get it to its simplest form, that equals 62.5%. So 5/8 as a fraction, it equals 62.5% as a percentage. Okay, now we'll look a little more at converting decimals to percentages. I briefly touched on that with our chart, but we'll just look at a little more detail here. So for converting a decimal to percentage, we're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So basically what we're doing here is we're multiplying the decimal by 100. And then we'll add a percent symbol. So for example, 0.65 would be 65%. 0.2 would be 0.20. Remember, I've mentioned before that a 0 is the last number of a decimal, can be added, and the value remains the same, which in this case we need to do that to make it a percentage. So, and then we add our percent sign, so that would be 20%. 0.45, move our decimal 2 places to the right, and then add the percent sign, it's 45%. And the number 1, if we move our decimal 2 places, we can, put our zeros on there. 1.00, that's the same as 1. So 1 equals 100%. Okay, now we'll look at it the other way, converting percentages to decimals. So first we're going to remove the percent symbol, and then we'll move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So here we're dividing by 100. So 99% would be 0.99. 30% would be 0.30, but then since we have the 0 on the end of the decimal, we can drop that, so it's 0.3. And 82.5% would be 0.825. Okay, now we'll look at a summary of our fractions, decimals, and percentages. Just some key points here. So a fraction is a portion of a whole indicated by division of the whole into equal parts. And remember, we had our examples of the pie where you can see you divide it in 4 equal parts. One of the parts is shaded, that would be 1/4. If we have 2 of the parts shaded, that would be 2/4. So a fraction can be changed to an equivalent fraction by multiplying or dividing the numerator, remember that's the top number, and the denominator, which is the bottom number, by the same number. So for example, 2/4, it equals 1/2, when both would be divided by 2. And the line separating the portion and the whole of a fraction means to divide. Remember, per means to divide. And this is how to convert a fraction to a decimal. So for example, 1/4, that's 1 divided by 4, that equals 0.25. When the numerator equals the denominator, the fraction equals 1. So our examples, 4 over 4 equals 1. 8 over 8 equals 1. 3 over 3, that equals 1. When the numerator is greater than the denominator, the fraction is going to be greater than 1. So for example, 5 over 4 or 3 over 2, that's going to be greater than 1. To write a whole number as a fraction, put it over 1. So 4 written as a fraction would be 4 over 1. And to multiply fractions, multiply the numerators across, multiply the denominators across, and then reduce the new fraction to its simplest form. So for example, 2/3 times 1/4. If you multiply across the top and across the bottom, we get 2/12. That can be reduced if we divide the numerator and the denominator both by 2. That would equal 1/6. So a decimal, that's a way of writing a fraction expressed as a base of 10. Remember, decimal actually means based on 10. And on the left side of the decimal point is a whole number, and on the right side is the fraction. And decimals are named by their lowest place value. Remember, going from the decimal point to the right, we have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. And knowing how to read decimal place value is important for converting decimals to fractions. For example, 0.1, that's 1/10, and so that's what it equals as a fraction, 1/10, 1/10. Remember, a percentage is a number expressed as a fraction of 100, and percent actually means per 100. And percentages can be converted to fractions and decimals. So to convert a percentage to a fraction, put the percentage over 100 and then reduce it to its simplest form. To convert a fraction to a percentage, multiply by 100 over 1 and then reduce it to its simplest form. To convert a percentage to a decimal, drop the percent symbol and move the decimal 2 places to the left. So basically you're dividing by 100. And to convert a decimal to a percentage, move the decimal 2 places to the right. So here you're multiplying by 100 and then add the percent symbol. And here's our chart that we looked at with the common fraction, decimal, and percentage equivalents. 3/4 is 0.75, which is 75%. 1/2 is 0.5, which is 50%. 1/3 is 0.33, which is 33%. 1/4 is 0.25, which is 25%. 1/8 is 0.125, which is 12.5%. And you can see an example here with our 1/4. It's drawn as the pie. We have one part out of the 4 equal parts shaded, and that would be equal to 0.25, and that equals 25%, just to give you a little more visual there. Thanks for watching. Please like and share this video with others who may find it helpful, and please subscribe to see more of my drug information videos. Thank you.